Hello everyone. I learned about today's case while covering my last case, which was the disappearance of Candace Singbeil, because this case also takes place in Saskatoon with another young woman who is also struggling. Mackenzie Trottier was born June 18th of 1998, being the firstborn child to her mother Gina and her father Paul, later getting two younger siblings named Sadie and Lauren. Her mother later writing in a dedicated Facebook post to her birthday, saying, and I quote, 26 years ago today, the most beautiful baby girl entered the world. After a long week of labor, multiple trips to RUH, stuck in the elevator, the first words I said, Mackenzie Lee, I've been waiting for you. End quote. As a little girl, Mackenzie was described as bright and shining. She loved to spend time outdoors, one of her favorite places to go being her family's cabin. She always had a passion for everything she did, such as riding horses, singing, and animals. Growing up, she even had multiple different types of pets, including snakes, rats, chameleons. However, as her teen years crept in, Mackenzie began to get bullied, which started in 6th grade, and her parents began to notice her often becoming stressed and anxious. Gina sang, and I quote, if I'd known how bad it was going to get, I would have pulled her, end quote. One of her closest friends at the time was a girl named Nevada who was also getting bullied. Now, due to Canada's healthcare system, which is a whole nother topic for a whole nother time, it would take 2 years of Mackenzie sitting on a waiting list for her to get a psychiatrist so that she could begin to even deal with the mental toll that the bullying had done to her. But then after waiting all this time and finally getting a psychiatrist that she really clicked with, that psychiatrist ended up going on mat leave, which is maternity leave. But then the next psychiatrist she ended up getting, she didn't mesh with. So then she eventually started to slip into her self-destructive habits again. In 11th grade, Mackenzie began hanging out with individuals who didn't go to her school. And by 12th grade, she completely dropped out and just began working. Mackenzie was now no longer hanging out with friends her own age and was now often hanging out with an older crowd. Mackenzie would begin struggling with addiction. Around 2018, for around a year and a half or so, her family often didn't see her for long stretches of time. Eventually, she would agree to come home and do detox, but within a month, she relapsed. After this, her family again wasn't seeing her for long stretches of time. She would only come by every now and then, and she was often couch surfing and staying with people that her family didn't know. Now, towards the end, Mackenzie was living with a specific male individual who has never been named. However, this relationship that she had with this male individual that she was living with seemed to be a very toxic and violent one. At one point, she was so scared she had to ask her father to pick her up on a side street near the home so that this male individual didn't see her being picked up. And her father even went as far as calling this man a piece of crap. But unfortunately, the cycle would continue because Mackenzie would keep returning back to that male individual's home. At one point, she even returned to her family's home with strangulation marks on her neck, and her family begged her to go to the police, but she refused to. Gina sang, and I quote, the path Mackenzie chose was not a great one, and we ran into every wall imaginable. She always used to say, you're embarrassed of me. Not knowing the depth of her addiction and struggle, we always kept a distance to give her space. Now we look back and wish we had invaded that space even as a young adult. Her last few weeks with us showed an improvement and a glimpse of hope that she was ready for help. I also saw she was scared of something, and I begged her not to go back. End quote. In December of 2020, her father Paul would once again pick her up at that male individual's home and attempted to convince Mackenzie to stay with them and to go to rehab again. And she did stay at home for a while. 22-year-old Mackenzie would last be seen by her family on December 21st of 2020. That day, Mackenzie ended up asking her sister Sadie if she wanted to go to the mall with her. However, Sadie had homework, so she declined. Right before leaving, her mother Gina was upstairs and she heard some wrestling downstairs, and she came down to find Mackenzie at the front door with her jacket on. So Gina began to ask her daughter questions, such as, where she was going, what time she thought she'd be back, and she even offered to give her a ride. Mackenzie would decline the ride, but she would promise her mother that she would be back later that night. At 1:15 p.m., Mackenzie would leave her family's home using a rideshare program. As soon as Mackenzie ended up leaving, Gina actually went onto her phone and began looking at Apple's location sharing, seeing where Mackenzie was actually going because Mackenzie had her location shared to her mother. And Gina would watch as Mackenzie's location showed the car taking her back to that unnamed male individual's home, the same home that her family had just rescued her from multiple times, which is something we often see the cycle of abuse in cases of DV. Statistically, it takes 7 times for a woman to leave before she can leave an abusive relationship. And then when you add drugs to the mix, it's just an even more awful situation. Now, considering that Mackenzie was an adult, the family ended up not chasing after her that evening. Instead, they tried to text her, but they never got any responses. However, Mackenzie would never return home again. and by the 23rd, the family began to grow a little bit more worried. Again, she would disappear for weeks at a time. However, this time they just had this feeling that she wanted to get better and she had to come back home, but now she just wasn't responding. Now, her not responding wasn't something totally out of character. She often wasn't on her phone. However, when the 23rd came and went and Mackenzie still wasn't responding to anyone, that is when people began to get a bad feeling. And then at 3:50 p.m. on December 24th, Mackenzie's phone would end up dying. On top of this, it was Christmas and Mackenzie had never missed a holiday. That was one thing. She would always show up for holidays. And we often see this in missing persons cases as well that happen around the holidays. You know, even when addictions are involved, the person usually still comes around and they want to be with family. They want to celebrate. So this was a very big red flag that Mackenzie was not showing up for Christmas. During the days after Mackenzie's disappearance, her family would drive around the snowy streets of Saskatoon. Her father even began banging on the door of the home on the 1300 block of Avenue BN that Mackenzie had been staying at with that unknown male individual, and that was the last place she was known to be. However, Paul wouldn't get any response. Eventually, Paul would notice the garage door open, and that is when he went and finally got to confront that unnamed male individual, who, according to Paul, was not someone you would want your child to be associated with. When questioned, Paul said that this man was evasive and unconcerned, telling Paul that he hadn't seen Mackenzie since December 24th, which is the day her phone turned off, which is very concerning. Mackenzie's sister Sadie would finally be the one to pressure her parents into reporting her sister missing, because her family at this point just had hope that Mackenzie would just show up somewhere, that maybe she went off some other friends, maybe she was on a binge of some sort, and she would eventually turn up. And they just didn't want to involve police at this point. However, after Paul finally got to speak to that unnamed male, they finally had enough and they decided it was time to bring police into this. So on December 30th, the family would finally report Mackenzie missing to police. What happened to her would remain a mystery for years. Mackenzie is described as 5 foot tall, 145 pounds, with blonde, medium-length hair, which was shaved on the right side. She had green eyes, a fair complexion, broken front teeth, and a tattoo on her right ankle. She usually wore heavy makeup, black yoga pants, a heavy green jacket, and carried a large purse. In the initial days of the search, police interviewed family, they took statements, and they dispatched officers to that male's home. Now, that male individual did end up allowing police inside of his home. However, I never seen anywhere, even in a documentary that was done on the case, if police found any evidence. And you think if they had, that he might have been arrested at that point in time. However, it's never been noted anywhere. So it truly does make me wonder if there was not a violent crime scene there then, or Mackenzie possibly didn't die there. However, police would call this unnamed male a person of interest, and they would say that they believed Mackenzie's case was foul play. Eventually, police would figure out that Mackenzie's bank card was last used at a 7-Eleven, not far from the man's home on December 26th. However, surveillance would show it was not Mackenzie that used her bank card, but it was someone else.
Saskatoon Crime Stoppers is requesting the assistance in identifying this male, who police believe may have information relating to the disappearance of Mackenzie Trottier. Here is a sketch of the convenience store male who is described as being approximately 5'3" in height. These images will also be available on our Facebook and website page to view.
And the someone else was not the unnamed male. Police would end up releasing a photo from a surveillance video along with a sketch of the suspect. The man is seen wearing a wilderness roofing jacket. However, the company would go on to claim that they didn't recognize the man. So it's speculated then that possibly this man could have been gifted the jacket by a family member or a friend that didn't need it anymore, or possibly he could have gotten it at a thrift store of sorts. Unfortunately, police would come out and say that they did not believe that this man was involved in Mackenzie's death. As the weeks turned to months and the months turned to years, the search for Mackenzie spread outside the province. Posters and billboard campaigns, along with anniversary stories, kept the search in the public consciousness and triggered tips with possible sightings in other cities.
On the good days, this is where Paul Trottier finds moments of peace. The rhythm of brush against canvas dulls the dark thoughts about his daughter Mackenzie.
So it's a disconnect of sorts. And although the time periods are shorter now of that disconnect.
Mackenzie Trottier left her parents' house 4 days before Christmas and hasn't been seen since. Now, some 50 days later, her parents and friends are concerned for her safety. Paul Trottier runs an independent art supply store. The past month, he's juggled running a business during the pandemic and dealing with a missing daughter. Life is not the same at work or at home.
she's loved. So of course I'm always looking for her on the street. Every time I drive, I look in cars, I look, everywhere. Yeah, and as my wife has said, when the car door slams, she's up and looking out the window to see if it's Matt coming home.
The family would also go on to hold rallies and press conferences in hopes of spreading the word of Mackenzie's disappearance.
She has been away from us for 8,040 hours.
335 days. That's the last time Mackenzie Trottier's family heard from her. That's why family and friends gathered in downtown Saskatoon Sunday, many holding posters, signs, or wearing shirts for Mackenzie. Her father says to see the support from the community means the world to him.
Seeing all these people out here on a cold morning is incredibly warming for our family, knowing that we have that kind of support. It really is spectacular.
Mackenzie was last seen on December 21st, 2020, leaving her home in the 300 block of Trent Crescent in Saskatoon. Since then, her family has never stopped looking for her.
Not forgetting, obviously, but just caring about with our days, because we can't just mourn all day. So
you still have to look for the good in life.
Still have to have hope.
The family is praying, begging she is found, as the continual wait is unbearable. But knowing that people, even strangers, care and have joined the search means that they are not alone in finding Mackenzie.
The support from everywhere, almost all over the world, is kind of crazy to see how many people care and want to help someone that they never knew in a family that they never knew.
Paul says there have been a number of tips, but none have led to Mackenzie's whereabouts at this point. He says they aren't going to stop searching or spreading the word in Saskatchewan and across Canada.
In our case, Mackenzie has gone missing. It's been 11 months. And sometimes we forget. We were inundated with information, and it's really important for us to continually remember that somebody is actually missing from our family.
In June of 2021, a citizen would end up finding a piece of Mackenzie's ID off a highway off-ramp in Saskatoon. Now, when we looked at everything, considering a stranger, an unnamed male, had been using Mackenzie's bank card at a 7-Eleven, and now her ID was found thrown by a highway, it started to make people suspicious if her wallet had possibly been just thrown out of a car window or something like that. Who did that, though, and who had her wallet, you think would be linked to possibly who did something to Mackenzie. Police would also be informed around this time that Mackenzie had actually been escorting for quite a few months before her disappearance. However, it seems she was doing so independently. There was nothing to indicate that she had a pimp. However, we often do see pimps acting as boyfriends, and this unnamed male was a boyfriend of sorts to her that she kept going back to, so that just, comes up in my mind. However, that's not been, named anywhere. Police never found any ties to that anywhere. But this did bring the theory of her being trafficked to the list. Nearly a year after Mackenzie's disappearance on December 8th of 2021, a tip would finally come in of a possible sighting of Mackenzie 600 kilometers away in downtown Calgary, Alberta. This began to sort of support that theory of Mackenzie either being trafficked or running away. However, family were very adamant that Mackenzie would not run away. On top of that, they pointed out the fact that she had a family in Calgary, so they thought if she was going to run away somewhere, she wouldn't run away somewhere where she would easily be spotted, possibly. Police, meanwhile, were still very focused on the house on the 1300 block of Avenue BN. Saskatoon Police Service Major Crime Unit Sergeant Corey Lenius saying, and I quote, "She has stayed at that residence quite often, and one person always stood out to investigators as being involved in Mackenzie's disappearance." End quote. And that is them speaking on that unnamed male individual. Now, as I said, Mackenzie's father, Paul, hated this unnamed male individual. He said multiple times he thought this guy was a piece of crap, it wasn't someone you would want your child near, and he backed this up by saying that he didn't think this man was good in his daughter's life because he was a user and he used people. As I said, her father hated this man, and rightfully so, and now he's the last person to see his daughter alive. Her phone literally tracked to his home, and that's the last place she ever was, and now she's just been missing for over a year. On top of that, this seems to be the authorities' number one suspect. But unfortunately, life just doesn't seem to be fair, because this unnamed male individual would later die of a drug overdose in December of 2023. And police don't have any other suspects other than him, which is pretty devastating to the case, because if this man did do something to Mackenzie, there may never be justice, unfortunately. In spring of 2024, police would begin searching the local landfill in Saskatoon, only saying that evidence is what pointed them in that direction. Now, it would turn out that a veteran police technologies officer would end up cracking a passcode of a device that was owned by that unnamed male individual. And in his search history, it included searches for pickup times for the garbage trucks in the area around the time of Mackenzie's disappearance. And that's something we talked a lot about in Candace's disappearance as well, which I definitely recommend you go look into that case because her case is also still unsolved. But police also went to this exact same landfill searching for Candace's body. And they did that because they ended up finding the exact garbage truck because of surveillance footage that picked up the garbage that day that they thought her body may have been placed in. And then they were able to find the exact location in the landfill to go search. Now, they didn't search as long in Candace's case. They searched a lot longer in Mackenzie's case for her body. But it's very interesting to see two different cases in the same town that have the same MOs of sorts. You know, two relatively young women. They were about a decade apart in age, but relatively young women, both struggling, both addicted to drugs, both associating themselves with a high-risk lifestyle and some very unsavory people. And now both of them are missing, somewhat around the same time periods. And police think both of them were thrown into the landfill. That is just absolutely, it's horrific. It truly is. And it's sad. Due to the search history of that unnamed male, they were also able to determine a specific garbage truck that would have taken the garbage that day from that man's house. So they were also able in Mackenzie's case to narrow down an area of where to search in the landfill. But this left police to sift through 5,000 tons of garbage in a targeted area. And they would search for months until on August 1st of 2024, just a month or so ago as I'm filming this video, after searching for 1,319 days, the body of 22-year-old Mackenzie Trottier would be recovered from the city's landfill. Her cause of death is still unknown at this time.
We asked all of you here today to provide an update with regard to the Mackenzie Trottier missing person investigation. Last week, the Saskatoon Police Service concluded its search of the City of Saskatoon landfill following the recovery of human remains. For 93 days, police and purpose-trained dogs methodically searched a calculated area of the landfill for evidence relevant to the Mackenzie Trottier missing person investigation. On July 30th, members of the Public Safety Unit searched the landfill and made a partial recovery of human remains. Following a continued search, on August the 1st, a full recovery of human remains was made. Through consultation with forensic anthropologist Dr. Ernie Walker and the examination of dental records, the deceased has been identified as then 22-year-old missing person Mackenzie Lee Trottier. An autopsy was conducted on August 1st and found that her cause of death is currently undetermined. The Saskatchewan Coroner Service is now investigating the file. Through our investigation, a suspect in Mackenzie's disappearance has been identified. However, before investigators could obtain the evidence required to prove their involvement, the suspect died in an unrelated incident. Evidence recovered from electronic devices belonging to that suspect supported the search of the landfill. On behalf of all members of the Saskatoon Police Service, I extend our sincerest condolences to the Trottier family, thank them for their trust and their patience and their participation throughout this deeply difficult process.
Her father, Paul, would end up picking up her remains from the funeral home after police were done with their forensic work in the early August. He would end up wrapping the container of her ashes in a jacket and strapping her into the front seat of his Subaru. He said he offered her a cigarette and said his piece to her. Paul sang, and I quote, "3 years is a long time not talking to your child. There was laughter, there was sorrow, there was remorse. All those things are part of the conversation. You're home. We got you home." End quote. Which is just so heartbreaking to think about. This family is just so freaking strong.
I didn't realize how tired I was. I'm quite tired.
Paul Trottier describes the 3.5-year search for his daughter as climbing a mountain. He never expected the metaphor would turn into a literal mountain. We now know that police had a suspect in Mackenzie Trottier's disappearance from the start. The man died of a drug overdose in December 2023, and investigators were able to get into his phone.
Through this search, investigators determined that there was a high likelihood that Mackenzie was in the Saskatoon landfill.
Now I don't even know what to think or where to go or who to hate. You know, like, what do you do with that? And then when the information came out about the landfill, then that is a whole other thing. To have a human dealt with in that way. How do you deal with that? You're a parent. You want to know. You want to bring your daughter home, but seriously? Seriously?
Police began searching in May. That stretched into June and then July.
60 days have passed. What's going on? We're going to keep searching. Okay? That entire time you live on pins and needles. It's a surreal experience of some out-of-body view that you're not even a part of it. You exist and you're going through the motions. You live on those pins and needles every single day, every single text message, every single phone ring, everything. It's a horrible place. It's tough.
And then the call and all the fears and hopes. So they sat you down and said,
Yeah.
"We found her remains."
Yeah.
What was your reaction in that moment?
Are you sure? Still that doubt? Still that hope? Yeah, I think that was a lot of it. Are you sure? And then they laid out why or how they knew, and it was like, okay, now we have to deal with this.
But there are still so many more unanswered questions. Clearly, the number one suspect is that unnamed male. And in my opinion, I agree with police. I think he did something to her in that home. Now, whether the DV just got out of hand, something happened and she was killed, or possibly there was an overdose and he ended up covering it up because he panicked, or maybe there was a combination of the two. The fact that there was a history of DV going on there, the fact that his home was the last place that she was ever seen by him, admittedly, although he says he last seen her on the 24th, according to Paul. Her family watched the rideshare vehicle drive her to his home, and that is where I'm assuming her phone remained for that day or so. And that is also the point in time she stopped communicating. Those are all serious red flags that all point to that unnamed male individual doing something to her. And then the fact that he had searched up on his phone the trash disposal times says a lot. And then police went and found her body in that exact spot that same truck would have taken her to. It's just, it all points to him. But unfortunately, he did pass away. So will there ever be solid answers in Mackenzie's case? I don't know. He can't be prosecuted, so it's kind of open-ended in that way. And I am really curious what autopsy will eventually show, if they were able to find anything or if it is just going to be undetermined, because I'm sure the state of her body wasn't great when it was found. Again, it was never noted that any evidence was found in his home, so it makes me wonder, especially with the past where she was strangled, it seems like, by him, allegedly, according to her family. It makes me wonder if something like that could have happened again, and that is why there was no evidence found. You know, there was no blood or anything. It wasn't like she could have been possibly stabbed to death or something like that. If it was a strangulation, there might not be evidence in the way you may think. So it could have happened at his home, you know, then he Googled that information, threw her in the dumpster, which is just awful to say, but it's reality. And her body then was found where it was. And if her body was decomposed, they may not be able to find the, strangulation marks or something like that. I don't know, I'm not an expert, but it's just, where my mind is wandering to, considering there's a lot of unknowns at this point. However, the fact that Mackenzie's body has been recovered is at least some sort of, answers, or at least relief that I hope the family can find. I hope they can find some peace. I know it depends on the person, but not everyone finds closure with an ending like that. However, at least there are some answers that not every family gets. And when cases are left so open-ended where you don't know where someone has gone when they've disappeared and there's no answers to that, they're just gone, it often sometimes leaves people's lives on hold because you're constantly waiting for that person to come back. But sometimes at least knowing what has happened to them you can start to heal and move on. I do truly hope, though, that there are more answers for the family in the future. Mackenzie didn't deserve whatever was happening to her. She was struggling, and she did seem to be in a very bad situation. She was so young still. She was only 22. She had such a future ahead of her. She could have gotten clean. She could have been able to start a family if that's what she wanted and live an amazing life. But that was unfortunately taken from her by most likely this unnamed male, which I truly wish he was named, because I don't know why they do this in Canadian cases, but they hate to name suspects. There's like such privacy, it seems like, against suspects. And in my opinion, if this person, especially most likely in this case, it seems like, is the one to do something, why is that person being protected? Why is there such protection against the perpetrators? And why is there no protection against victims? It's a big question that I have, but what do you all think? I know a lot of you told me to cover this case and look into this case, which is why I'm sitting here now. I more so like to cover cases where there isn't answers, because hopefully spreading the word could lead to answers, but it's still important to talk about cases like this as well. And I know a lot of people like cases that have an ending, which now this one does, in a way. Mackenzie was brought home. My heart goes out to Mackenzie's family. Again, I truly hope you can find some peace, and I truly hope more answers come in the future. And as always, if there are any other cases that you guys want me to look into, leave a comment down below and I will add them to my list. I have a very long list to go through, but just keep on commenting them because I will keep adding. On top of that, if you just, comment down below as well, other people will see it and maybe they'll look into the case, and more eyes are always better. If you are needing help out there, I will leave some links down below for DV hotlines and, treatment centers. Please go get help. You deserve so much more. But as always, I hope you all stay safe out there, lock your windows and doors, and I hope to see you in the next video.